Hello there guys, Daniel Childs back here again for another edition of Let's Talk Chelsea. Hope you're doing really well on this Thursday. In today's show, we're talking about Reece James, the injury situation, what is the future for him at Stamford Bridge, and also Mykhailo Mudryk linked away with a move this January. What does it mean for him now after the summer transfer window? Jadon Sancho playing well on his Chelsea debut. Please do hit that like button. Please get involved in the comments. Give me your thoughts around Chelsea and the topics we speak about. Thank you if you're listening on the podcast feed. I want to say a massive thank you once again to the guys at Alloy Collectors. Great guys. We've talked about this before. The metal home shirt. You can get 15% off at checkout using my discount code SonOfChelsea. Great quality collectibles. Chelsea officially licensed to. This is the retro kit from 98, the year I was born. So quite a good year in Chelsea history, if I say so myself. But obviously for European success, as we know, with this man, number 25, playing a massive role in that. But of course, it's not just the retro shirts, which I have to say I'm very excited to see what other retro shirts they do. But obviously, modern Chelsea kits, other Chelsea memorabilia. So get down to Alloy Collectors online, description box below, and use my discount code SonOfChelsea. Great people, proper football fans, making great collectibles as well that definitely deserve your support. So use my discount code if you want to get yourself one before the weekend, before the West Ham game, and get yourself a collectible, put it on your shelf, give it to a Chelsea friend. But anyway, let's jump into it with Reece James. So there's been a bit of discourse around him and kind of whether there's been an update over his injury or not. And what I mean by that in like the last couple of days, because of course we did get an injury update for Reece James before the Bournemouth game, where Enzo Maresca spoke in his pre-match press conference, because Gusto didn't play that game, Lavia didn't play that game, and James didn't play that game. I guess the difference this week is we have heard a slight change where both Lavia and Gusto have returned to training, or at the very least have started to progress in their rehab program, but Reece James isn't there. Reece James doesn't seem to be any closer to returning, and Chelsea are not going to wait, or Chelsea are not going to rush basically Reece James back. So very likely he will not be involved against West Ham. Will he be involved against Barrow in the League Cup? Will he be involved against Brighton? Obviously there's a few games coming up, and hopefully that'll be soon, but he's already missed 6 games this season. Now, we always come back to this with Reece James, and I think it's a thing that I stress with a number of topics I speak about regarding Chelsea, that I think reality matters. Not a massive statement, I know, but we want to be hopeful, we want to be optimistic, but I do think reality and the data in front of us matters. I think it'd be silly for me to sit here and to try and make out that being really concerned about Reece James' injury history is silly, and it's something that you shouldn't pay that much attention to. Also, as I've always said, as many others have said about Reece James, when we have conversations surrounding his injury history, what it means for his future at Chelsea, that has never been related to his actual quality, his actual impact on the pitch. The problem is how much he's actually on the pitch, obviously. So whether he's had a setback or not, the reality is, as you can see from the graph to my left where I'm pointing on screen now, it'll be to the right of your screen, stats this season, he hasn't made any appearances so far this season. Obviously he played a lot in pre-season, but he was injured just before this hamstring injury came up, just before the start of the season, so he's already missed 6 games. And then I found it quite interesting going back to the 2020-21 season, where he made 47 appearances. He still had, I think, a couple of injury issues during that year, but, comparative to what we would see in the upcoming years, I mean, it's not even close. 47 games he played that year, where Chelsea, of course, won the Champions League, where he played in the Champions League final for Tuchel. Then we moved to the 21-22 season. This is the year where both him and Chilwell got injured. 39. So, still, that was an injury that was more of an injury problem year for him, but he still played 39 games. Then it drops to 24 in 22-23, and then last year, the lowest, 11. These are concerning numbers of him playing less games as we've gone forward in time, basically. And we look at his injury record, you go way back to 1920, didn't miss that many games comparative, but then you look at all of the injury problems that are listed on Transfermarkt, these specific injuries, a lot of them are hamstring, and the hope was after that surgery he had last year, that was going to make a huge difference. It clearly hasn't, and we still are in the same kind of area with Reece James, where he's out. We don't know when he's going to return. Chelsea are being very cautious about that return, and his body keeps breaking down. what happens next, I think, is the big conversation, because the reality is, the longer this goes on, the ability for Chelsea to maybe sell Reece James, and again, this is not something I want, but I guess as a club, you'd be looking at it and going, well, it's not like a club is going to come in and spend ridiculous money on Reece James. Given his incredible potential, why would you invest that much when you've already seen a player that might not be available for you more than like 15 games a year? That's the real problem. It's the same thing I used to say about N'Golo Kante. They're quite similar situations in the sense, when Kante was on the pitch, he was Chelsea's best player more times than not. He could win us Champions League. His influence was outstanding, and we saw that at the back end of last season for Reece James when he came on against Nottingham Forest. He kind of changed that game for Chelsea. He set up the winner for Nicholas Jackson. But it doesn't really matter, does it, if you're relying so much on Reece James and he can't stay fit for more than a couple of weeks a season? That's a real problem. Now, I guess the solution, what is the solution? I've seen some people kind of suggest, would a loan be best? Is that even feasible? Is that even realistic? A loan to maybe a less stressful league? But I would also counter that by saying that, Reece is getting injured not just in active competition. Like, this recent injury did not come from him playing a game at Stamford Bridge. A lot of these injuries seem to always be happening actually off the ball. There are very few times Reece James is getting injured on the ball, like he's getting tackled by someone. It's not impact injuries. These are muscle injuries that keep on reoccurring over and over again. So as much as I'm not, a sports scientist by any means, you look at the nature, the trend has continued over a long period of time. I'm not entirely sure him going to another league is going to completely eradicate those problems. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Is it something to do with Chelsea's process of rehabbing players? Did he play too much in pre-season? I think that's a big concern as well. I think if we look at two players, Romeo Lavia and Reece James, I guess you could argue Nkunku and Fofana have actually been okay, but 50% of the players who we were really concerned about injury-wise and wanted to sort of easily get back into game time, who missed a lot of last season, 50% of those are already out. Hopefully Lavia will return, but for Reece, I'm just not sure, because my deep concern is that this is just Reece James, and this is kind of what he is as a player, and he will go through long spells not playing football. Maybe that will change, but there are concerns. We've seen it in history. Like I think of the likes of Ledley King. That's always one that's brought up of an incredible player for Spurs who, unfortunately, injuries really ruined his career and stopped what could have been an even better career for him. Of course, Jack Wilshere is one that's brought up. I'm just talking England kind of perspective here. Maybe players can get past their injuries. You look at Christian Pulisic right now at AC Milan. Loftus-Cheek is another example at AC Milan. Two players who had persistent injury problems, ironically left Chelsea and now found themselves a little bit fitter during the course of the season. And they're both in Italy, so maybe that could be a destination for Reece James. But I know it's an emotional topic because we know how incredible Reece James is. It always is an emotional topic to speak about him. And I'm not sitting here telling you he needs to be sold, he needs to be loaned. But the reality is his injury problems aren't halting. They aren't seeming to slow down. And it just comes a point where, how do we frame Reece James in the season? Because I've already, mentally, I've unfortunately got to a point now where I don't consider Reece James one of the key Chelsea players. Not that his talent doesn't merit that, it's just you kind of expect that he isn't going to be there. So the concern actually is Malo Gusto. Can Malo Gusto stay fit? Could we promote Josh Akipon potentially in a right back position? Because that area is key for Chelsea. It's key for Enzo Maresca, and you can't have a situation where you're relying on someone to stay fit. That is why Gusto is probably one of the most important signings Chelsea have made in recent years. But hopefully he can avoid injury, because the recent one, really causes a problem. So let me know your opinions on Reece James and whether you think he will be able to get past this. Obviously, he's still a young age. He's not, it's not like he's near the end of his career. And as we've explained with another academy player like Loftus-Cheek, who did get through that eventually, but we know with Loftus-Cheek, I think he even said so recently, how detrimental those injuries can be to a career. So hopefully, just pray Reece can get through this, but it's Groundhog Day. It absolutely is. Mykhailo Mudryk. So Mudryk, there's been talk in recent days, especially this week, regarding a potential move in January. Marseille have been linked, even Bayern Munich have been linked. There's been reports out of Spain, but also Team Talk, I know I've reported this and others too. Not strong links, but I think it's an interesting conversation to have right now, because after what Chelsea did in the summer, bringing in Pedro Neto and especially bringing in Jadon Sancho, the concern is clearly for Mykhailo Mudryk is where is he going to get this football? I was interested looking at some of the pieces around him that stated he's only scored 5 league goals in 48 appearances over 3 seasons of 4 managers. That's quite crazy. And it's reported here there were concerns, however, prior to his move to London, that having made just 65 senior club appearances as a professional, he may need a long adaptation period. But he hasn't been given consistent minutes in English football, and that remains one of the big concerns, and especially now with what Chelsea have done, bringing in Jadon Sancho, who, you know, based off his debut, looks like he's going to get more football at Chelsea, and that's probably the right decision. Pedro Neto is an experienced Premier League player. I think has already shown some good flashes at Chelsea, and obviously the other competition around Chelsea's squad in kind of wide areas. If you're thinking that Mudryk maybe could look out wide on the right potentially. And the concern is absolutely there of where are these minutes going to come from. I think it's most realistic. Obviously, Joao Felix could potentially play on the left too. I think his best opportunity is going to come in the Conference League, as I did against Servette in those 2 legs. But, you know, that was before the signing of Jadon Sancho. So you always got to think about the knockdown effect of that, right? Like maybe if Sancho hadn't arrived, Mudryk would have been a cert to start a lot of the Conference League games as he did in the playoffs. But maybe not right now, given that Sancho's here, given that Felix will probably need to get some starts soon for Chelsea. So he's going to be looking maybe at Barrow. I mean, that is a clear example of a game that Mudryk really needs to be starting in, because if he's not starting against Barrow, where is he going to be starting for Chelsea unless Chelsea get an injury crisis, unless Mudryk somehow works his way back into the Premier League starting 11? I think the major concern for Mykhailo Mudryk is, I think in the past with his previous Chelsea managers, and he's gone through a lot already at Chelsea, is I think previous coaches have tried to put their arm around him, have tried to be very supportive about him. I think Pochettino was like that, kind of to a fault. You know, I don't think there was a lot of evidence actually all the time that Pochettino's trust in Mudryk was being repaid. But that was kind of the strategy. And because Chelsea have invested so much in Mykhailo Mudryk, and you feel like it's one of those players that the club maybe feel like they should be seeing in the team on a regular basis, no matter how good or bad he is, that was kind of the strategy. Maresca has kind of ditched that strategy quite quickly, and to be honest, I don't blame Enzo Maresca, because the performances haven't justified that, and it becomes the thing they go back to with signing Mudryk, of the floor of signing Mudryk. And I remember this is one of those cases where I can actually say I think I told you so, because I remember the day that Mudryk signed for Chelsea, I remember making a video and I talked about a lot of the concerns around signing him and the concerns of him walking into a Chelsea environment that wasn't great. And unfortunately, a lot of my fears have been realised. I think in terms of his lack of technique or maybe game intelligence, is something that has staggered me to a point. I mean, it really has, like how bereft he is of certain kind of basics at this level that I expect most academy players to have and do have. Like it's quite staggering at times how poor he's been. So I could see Chelsea looking to cut ties eventually. I think there will come a point where if Mudryk doesn't develop quickly enough, and where is he going to get those minutes, there will be an exit route that needs to be found. Whether that will be found by Marseille, I know Matt Law's talked about this. He's never mentioned a club, but he's mentioned it several times on London is Blue Pod, that a major European club came in to loan Mykhailo Mudryk last January. Who that was, I'm not entirely sure, which is quite staggering. Again, you kind of sometimes go back to this kind of transfer economy and it being kind of a false or misleading economy at times, where it kind of feels like if a player's bought for a certain amount of money, they stay in that bracket no matter what they do. But Mudryk, obviously, his value is going to start depreciating very quickly if he isn't playing regularly, and he's really on the fringes of Chelsea's first team squad. I have to say that I think for his career, he probably does need to move away from Chelsea. I just don't think it's going to be the best environment for his development, and I don't think he's ready to take on the responsibility really and what's required of him at this level. He looks so raw and like a player that probably needs to be in a less pressurized environment, somewhere at a club whose expectations isn't winning trophies, isn't competing for Champions League football, isn't trying to, get back to the top of the Premier League, and has so much media scrutiny on it too. You can never deny the personal, environment that he moved from at Shakhtar Donetsk. Obviously, his own nation going through a horrendous time in history. That's undeniable, and clearly that would impact any human being. I'm never trying to say that there's no sympathy for that. There absolutely is. But the reality is, Chelsea cannot wait for Mykhailo Mudryk 5 to 6 years for him to eventually develop into kind of a decent player. I think that, it was kind of put to me earlier in the year that, what he could kind of develop into Timo Werner. And, I'm sorry, but if the best we can hope for Mykhailo Mudryk is Timo Werner at Chelsea, it's a waste of time. If people have listened to my show long enough, they know my opinions on Timo Werner, and in some ways they are similar to Mudryk right now. So I could see this happening. I mean, De Zerbi at Marseille, but again, it comes back to finances, which may lead Chelsea again to accept a loan rather than selling him. But I just think it is something they're going to have to accept, because I also think Mudryk, the longer Mudryk is at Chelsea, I also think it lessens Chelsea's credibility in the transfer window, because it's always easy for me and someone else to say and look at Mudryk every time Callum Hudson-Odoi does well, or we overlook someone in our academy, or we maybe don't buy someone from elsewhere, to look at Mudryk and go, well, he's still in your squad, he's someone you paid a lot of money for. It doesn't really justify logically your squad building. So that's also why maybe Mudryk is someone that needs to be looking for football elsewhere. So let me know your opinions. Do you think Mudryk can turn it around at Chelsea and save his career? Let me know. Those are my thoughts today. Please let me know yours in the comments below, and I will see you again very soon. All the best.